Welcome to another episode of Off the Plugin Chain. I'm your host, Dr. Tom. Today's video is going to be about models of creativity. In earlier videos, I might have mentioned that I am a college teacher and I teach, among other things, the psychology of music, as well as a course in creativity. When I teach creativity, I've been using this book, Creativity 101 by James Kaufman, and it's worked out pretty good. I don't agree with everything that Kaufman says, but it's pretty good for a text on creativity. One thing I'd like to mention before we get any farther, though, is that in the last video, there was an error. I mentioned that trance music doesn't necessarily follow a cookie-cutter ABA pop music form. Well, that was kind of weird, because I don't know if there is such a form. That was a mistake in the video editing. It'd be very likely that a form with that much repetition would be kind of boring. Most pop music actually follows an ABABCB form, which is verse, chorus, bridge, chorus. Okay, so moving on. What is creativity? Creativity can be difficult to define, but it definitely involves doing something. Creativity is all about creating. The fields of art, music, writing, dance, and acting are all considered the traditional creative fields. Something creative is usually new or novel. It also is deemed as having some type of value by society at large. And some psychologists consider creativity to be a form of problem solving. With this definition, many things that you wouldn't necessarily consider creative are indeed creative. So when we look at creativity, there's definitely some skills that you need, and folks in my field often debate this idea about whether creativity is something that spans different domains or whether it's a specific type of activity or it's a specific type of domain with specific skills that are necessary. So if you're looking at domain general skills, these are skills that can transfer to many different areas in life, and we've all got working memory, and we should all have the ability to count. Domain-specific fields are skills that are useful for a specific field or domain of creativity. So in music, most people at some point at least learn about sight reading, and you use your ability to count to help you keep time, keep rhythm in music. So that's the difference between domain general and domain specific skills. There's a kind of descriptive model called the 4 Ps, starting with the person, who is creative. So that could be yourself or that could be somebody else. The process, how are we creative? And this can vary from person to person, but here are a few suggestions I'd like to give you. Say you're composing, although it could be painting, writing, whatever. You should do this with a plan. The chess grandmaster Anton Karpov was quoted as saying that when you play chess, you should always play with a plan. Even if you have a bad plan, you should have a plan. So the same is true of creative endeavors. Start with a plan. Make sure you can complete a rough draft or sketch that has a beginning, middle, and end. For me personally, that was essential. Once I learned that, it just helped my process immensely. This is just another suggestion, but you should really try to finish whatever you start. And that will go a long ways towards helping you continue to be creative. With creativity, we also look at the product. So what is considered creative? And creative artifacts or creative products would include painting, songs, novels, anything that you consider creative. That's the product. And then where are you creative? So that's the place. And some people can be inspired by going to the ocean or to the mountains or what have you. I personally discovered that when I was able to kind of nail down my process, that the emphasis on place, that there had to be a place where I was creative, didn't really matter. I could be creative anywhere I go. So working out your personal process, I think, is really important. Okay, and then there's the 4 Cs. A couple of these, I think, kind of have overlap. Mini C and little c. With mini C, the emphasis here is on personal meaning that the creative idea has to the individual. So if you're singing in your car or you're doodling while you're on the phone, that's considered mini C creativity. And then little c has a little bit more to it. It's everyday creativity. It's a little bit more refined. Things like cooking a meal. It doesn't have to be gourmet or anything, but this is a level above mini C. Cooking a meal, filming a YouTube video, just everyday stuff that you do can be considered little c creativity. And then we have pro C and big C. And pro C, that refers to individuals who are professional creators, or we can maybe call them creatives, but they haven't necessarily reached highly eminent status. And for some of those people, or maybe a lot of those people, that doesn't matter to them. They're working in a creative area, kind of maybe behind the scenes. Think if somebody's working on a film or a TV show, all the people that are running the cameras and the lighting and the grips and all of that, those individuals would be considered pro C. And then you have big C, which is big time creativity. It's associated with genius level creativity. And in the Creativity 101 book, Kaufman argues that both Mozart and Louis Armstrong would be in the big C category. And as much as I enjoy Louis Armstrong's music, I'm not sure that he and Mozart should be in the same category. So I personally think there may be 5 C's, because when you teach a class on creativity, Mozart will inevitably come up. And it's like, where do you put Mozart? Is he big C? So where would you put somebody like Beyonce? I mean, I adore her, and I think she's just got wonderful music. Is she pro C? Is she big C? So this is my take on it. It makes sense to put people who are known as creatives in areas such as film and music, etc. It could be newspapers or blogging or writing, whatever, that they should go in the pro C category. And then you'd have artists who have achieved notoriety and success in the big C category. So that's where Louis Armstrong would go, Beyonce. And then finally, you'd have people like Mozart who just really transcend this whole kind of idea of trying to put them in a box to begin with. I think they should have their own type of category. And those individuals I would consider ultra C. So that's just my take on it. I would add a 5th category called ultra C. Okay, now when I was a student back in the early 90s, the creativity model that we heard in my psychology classes was by this guy named Graham Wallace, and it was so current, like when I was taking cognitive psychology in 1991. The most recent model of creativity they were giving us was from 1926, and I really thought that was kind of a drawback. I thought, boy, is this all they can offer us? You'll see a lot has changed since then. But with Wallace model, he talks about preparation, incubation, intimation, illumination, and verification. So I'm not necessarily going to read through all of these. You can pause the video and check out these slides if that's what you want to do. But you start with preparing, so that you're working on a problem or an activity. And then, according to Wallace, there's always an incubation stage. This, I would dispute whether this is true or not. He suggests that even if you're not working on the activity or the project, that your mind is still working on it, so it's incubating. And then there's intimation, which sometimes they just leave out of this model altogether, and that's when you feel like you're about to make a breakthrough. And then you get illumination, which can seem like the aha experience, or eureka, I found it, flash of insight. And then there's the verification stage where you have to evaluate how you did. If your project is working on a song, then when you get to the verification stage, you have to determine, well, did I actually write a song? Is this a song? Does it qualify as a song? So anyways, going back to the incubation area, in a sense, you could argue that everything you do involves incubation, because you've got prior experiences that probably contribute to everything you do in the future. But I think that just makes this model something just untestable. Incubation for me would be if I'm working on a project and say it takes me 3 months, but in the middle I have to do some other things. So maybe it's incubating, I'm still getting to it, But I think, once a number of years have passed, perhaps, because that's even happened to me sometimes, I'll start a music project and it's taken me a while to get back to it. Is it truly incubating that whole time? I'm not sure. So anyways, this was the model that was very prominent for many years. I'm not going to go over all of these, but Mumford came out with a model in 1991. It's got 8 categories. Number 1, I put in yellow or highlighted, problem construction, and that goes along with the idea that maybe creativity involves having some type of problem or goal in mind that you're trying to solve or that you're trying to get to the bottom of. And so there's problem construction. When you get to 5 and 6, idea generation and idea evaluation, those seem really essential to the creative process no matter what. So if you look at how art changes, Gibson and Major identified 2 types of creativity: incremental and radical creativity. Incremental creativity builds on earlier work. So this is what Arnold Schoenberg did when he was writing free atonal music, roughly between, I think, 1910 or 1912 and about 1922. And he was writing free atonal music. I think he was, the idea of 12-tone was germinating within him, and he was testing all this out. But essentially, you could make the case that that type of free atonal music followed pretty closely from what Strauss and Wagner and some others in the late 1800s, what they were doing. It wasn't until about 1922, 1923, when Schoenberg really became committed to his 12-tone method, that he departed from writing free atonal music. And so in this case, then you would consider what he was doing radical creativity. So at different times, there's incremental creativity, there's radical creativity. And then Curtin in 1976 identified 2 types of creators: adapters and innovators. And I think sometimes there's kind of a bias. You think that innovators are the better types of creators, but you really need both. And if you're an adapter, you can be really skilled at adapting things. So you don't necessarily have to be an innovator to be a good creator. And definitely within the same people or same persons, you can use both approaches. Okay, so J.P. Guilford in 1967 proposed 2 types of thinking, which he called divergent and convergent. And divergent is kind of like thinking outside of the box, looking at different approaches, brainstorming. It's considered nonlinear. And that type of thinking has come to be associated with creative thinking. So consider something like improvising, where you're trying different approaches or just trying new approaches in general. That's divergent thinking. But creative activities also involve convergent thinking, or they can. And an example would be if you're setting up a score or you're creating parts for performers, that's the convergent part. So I think in a lot of ways people consider the divergent thinking part to be the creative act. It's fun, it's exciting, ideas are coming through you. But the convergent part is the part that maybe isn't as fun and exciting. But to finish a project, you need both. You need both divergent and convergent thinking approaches. Now, when I came across this model, it really resonated with me, the blind variation and selective retention model. And in this case, you generate ideas blindly without regard to their potential merit or success, and then you selectively retain the ones that you think are the best. And this is, I think, what a lot of us do. You test things out, blind variation, and then you selectively retain the ones that you think are the best ideas. So if I'd heard this in 1991, that would have been great. That would have been maybe life-changing for me. But instead, the model that we were getting was Wallace from 1926. Mikhail Csikszentmihalyi is a psychologist who identified something called the flow state. And this happens whenever you become so engaged in an activity. It seems like time disappears. You get lost in whatever it's you're doing. For me, it's playing the piano sometimes. But for others, it might be painting a picture. Sometimes when I work in the yard, time will fly by and I don't even notice it because I enjoy doing that. I know my mom really likes cooking. For her, maybe cooking could become a flow state. So flow states can be wonderful, but I don't think you can necessarily count on them to get you to the finish line when you're creating something. They're great for getting that creative urge out, that impulse out, but they're definitely a type of divergent thinking rather than a convergent one. So with flow states and that kind of thing, I think people start kind of getting focused on this idea that creativity requires inspiration. And sometimes, debating or considering where inspiration comes from, that can be an interesting topic on its own. But creativity can really become a habit, so you don't have to rely on inspiration. And if you want to know more about this, I would say read Twyla Tharp's book, The Creative Habit. Finishing projects in their entirety will give you the confidence to finish more projects. And it just, one thing builds on another. And so when you finish things in their entirety, and for me, for example, I used to write a lot of music when I was younger, and I would just get all the notes on the page, and I thought, wow, look at that. Great, I'm done. But what I'd left out was putting all the dynamics and the articulation and the phrasing marks and everything on the page. And it wasn't until I started doing that I started really understanding my music better, the ebb and flow within all of my music, and it enabled me to get the confidence that, yes, indeed, I can finish these projects from beginning to end. And the more that you do that, the more that you really get confidence that you can do that in the future. Now, there's an artist or an author named Stephen Pressfield who talks about an idea that he calls resistance in his book Turning Pro. And what Pressfield says is that resistance, or he calls this sort of metaphorical concept resistance, it keeps you from becoming creative, and it can cause writer's block. So if you think about George Martin, who wrote the Game of Thrones books, he had some pretty bad writer's block, and if I remember correctly, HBO finished the stories in his books, and he hadn't written anymore, and so then they had to, get their writers to continue on the story. So George Martin had he was getting stuck, and he was really falling prey to this kind of concept of resistance. It can create distractions for you. It causes you to make excuses, and it just gets in the way of doing the thing that you want to be doing. So what Pressfield suggests is that you should have a pro attitude, and this helps you fight resistance by getting you to do the creativity every day. And then that comes back to creativity being established as a habit. And the more that you engage in creativity every day, the more creativity will visit you in return. So it's kind of like visiting a friend, and then the more you visit this friend, they also in turn decide that they want to visit you. So the difference between George Martin and Stephen King is just it's like a huge chasm. Stephen King has a pro attitude. He writes every day. He sets aside time every day specifically to write. And a lot of writers do this. Ernest Hemingway was known for doing this too. He'd write in the morning, he'd drink at night, but he'd write every day in the morning. And a lot of writers had a page quota that they want to get to. I'm going to write 6 pages every day, and if you do that, you can get a novel done in 6 months. So that also goes along the lines of writing with a plan. So that's all I wanted to talk about. I could go on and on actually about creativity. But just wanted to kind of cover a few things. For me, like I said, it really helped when I started focusing on process, and this whole idea about creativity being a habit, and this pro attitude really helped me. And I can't emphasize more. Start with a plan. For me as a composer, I do a lot of writing at the piano. So once I get a completed sketch now, a piano sketch, has a beginning, middle, and end, I know I'm going to be able to finish. Now you can debate whether what I did is any good or not, but whatever. It's all part of the creative process. So I encourage you, check out some of these books I mentioned, think about these things, and I think that what you will find is that your creativity will become it will thrive, and you'll get the confidence to keep doing more stuff after you've completed other projects. So, all right, well, that's all I'm going to talk about today. So, thanks everybody for tuning in, and as always, stay safe, be well, and keep being creative.